Hello, friends. I hope things are going well for you. I am here today to talk a little bit more about our English 4540 work. We're going to talk a little bit about the Ron Padgett section that I got for you. Not a lot about it, just a little bit. I think that it'll be worthwhile to go into some discussion about it because I think it'll help us think about the way that we talk about the wide range of the work we do in various creative writing classrooms. I think in the creative writing classroom, it becomes easy to just fixate on the writing part. But I think there are things that Padgett talks about in terms of creative reading that are worthwhile for us. We'll talk about that. Also want to talk a little bit more about the textbook and the progress we're making on that, and the work we're going forward with that. I am not in my office alone right now. I'm in here with my daughter, who is doing some work. You can say hi. There she is. She's going to work really hard to focus on her math. Are you doing math right now? She's doing math. And I will focus really hard on you and making sure that we can have these conversations. So yeah, I said I wanted to talk about Ron Padgett. Padgett is a American poet who was born in 1941, I believe, 1942. And was known for his is known, he's, as far as I know, still alive, and he is doing very avant-garde work, very postmodern work a lot of the time. I'm going to read you a poem of his to start us off, and then we can, maybe if we read one of his poems, and his poems are easy to find. He's got some stuff on just going to poetryfoundation.org. You'll find plenty of work right away, and it's interesting and winding and wordy, and to use the word that Franck used in one of his discussion points, innovative. And we'll talk about innovative a bit as we go on throughout. So this is a sonnet, and it's called Nothing in That Drawer. It's a sonnet by Ron Padgett. Nothing in that drawer, nothing in that drawer, nothing in that drawer, nothing in that drawer. Nothing in that drawer, 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 nothing in that drawer. Now, there it is. I have notes. This is my postmodern American poetry textbook from when I was in college, and that's a lot of notes on a poem that's the same line repeated 14 times. But it's a way of kind of getting into the sonnet form and sort of dissecting it and working within it and playing around with it. Is it a sonnet? Well, it's got 14 lines. We can argue that it's making turns and twists along the way. Maybe it's just play. Maybe that's okay. Maybe it's the kind of thing that we want our students to be doing in the classroom, is playing. So I'd love to hear some thoughts from you on this little section that I found. If you want this entire book and are interested in it after reading this, it seems to be pretty easily available online. If you just Google Padgett Creative Reading, you'll probably find the text. If you don't, let me know, and I can make sure to get it for you. But I just wanted to read a couple of points here, and if you had points that you were interested in, you can address them too. Now, it might feel a little bit strange for us to be talking about reading in a class on writing, but we know how integrated those things are. We know that whenever we ask a writer, what can I do to become a better writer? They will tell you two things, and those two things are to read more and write more. But if we're telling our students to read more and write more, and then we're spending a lot of time talking to them about how they do the writing more part correctly, and we talk about writing strategies and we talk about writing techniques, and then we just assume they get the reading part on their own, we're not really doing them the service that they deserve. And that's why I like this chapter, because I think, and this entire book, because I think it gives us a sense of what it means to read creatively, which is something we just take for granted. I think we do this in all sorts of classes. In English classes, we have the chance to teach writing, but we don't always spend a lot of time with reading. Because when I assign a research paper in a composition class, I get to spend the entirety of that project cycle, that month or however long it is, spending each day talking about research papers. I don't know how my students feel about it, like from an entertainment perspective. I got jokes, I do my best. But when we work our way through, they have the tools. When you are in another class, a psychology class, and the psychology instructor says you're going to write a research paper, you probably don't hear about it again until it's due. Maybe they'll give you updates as it goes on, but that's probably the extent of it. In the creative writing class, like the composition class, we can spend time with the writing process and talking about the different stages and talking about revision. But we don't do that with reading. We just assume that everyone gets it. And that's why in my creative writing classes, and in here we've talked about it too, I want to talk about what it means to read as a writer. And we've already discussed that a bit. What does this mean? To get in there and look for things that you would not look for as a scholar or an academic or a student. I'd love to hear some more of your thoughts below, if you want to share those, about what it means to be reading as a writer. And how do we instill that in our students? And I find it interesting in the Paget section that we read that he kind of gets into it a little bit more too. In the section, it's the third page of the Take a Ride on the Reading chapter. It's page 3. It has a 17 at the bottom too. I want to look at the second full paragraph, kind of in the middle of this page. Writing is considered to be an active activity. In this essentially true but oversimplified view, the words flow from the writer out onto the paper. Now, I think it's important for us to look at writing as being active. I think that's a good thing. I think we want to get that across. Writers know, however, that what really happens is that the words originate either inside or outside the writer, go into the writer's conscious mind, moving out onto the paper, and then affect what words come next, forming a kind of rolling cycle. Right? When we're writing, we get to control this. And sometimes we might have things go in a direction that we don't want them, that we don't necessarily think they're going to go. Probably not. Probably we want them to go, but we don't know. I encourage this in my students. I want to make sure that my students progress in terms of their writing in a way that they don't expect. I don't want us to know exactly where we're going when we start a poem or a story or anything else to the end. And so in this, he's talking about how things kind of come, and maybe there are relationships that we aren't expecting. For example, I just wrote the word cycle, and for an instant, I had an image of the Harley-Davidson motorcycle my father rode as a young man. Normally, this image would have been only vaguely sensed and certainly not mentioned, but it would have affected what I wrote next, possibly a reminiscence of my childhood. I might have gone on to discuss how I learned to write, or it was like being in first grade in 1948, so on. The point here is that writing is not unidirectional from the writer out. It is at least bidirectional, both out and in at the same time. It is like a conversation, but oneself. In any case, writing is fundamentally active. So we'll talk about what he says about reading in a minute. But this is interesting, right? That it's active, and it's more active than we think as readers when we're reading a text. Because the writer might be kind of letting things move along. I call this sometimes the shiny thing syndrome, right? That we think of something based on a word that we've written, and then all of a sudden we want to write about something else. Or we see a thing off in the distance, whether it's literal or metaphorical, and that's what I want to write about. I want to write about that shiny thing that's going off in the distance. But here, he's kind of saying that the writer might think that, but often has to fight against that urge. So the activity might be both letting that cycle go wherever it will, or letting that cycle become a motorcycle and letting that take you somewhere, or fighting against that urge to let it become a motorcycle. So reading, in the oversimplified view, is seen as comparatively passive. Words travel from the page or screen or whatever, and into us, who sit there receiving. We allow the words to light up certain areas of the brain, to revive memories, to create scenes and excite emotions, even to make us wonder. But in some fundamental way, we are under the control of the words coming in. Sometimes we have to work to interpret them, but they have some sovereignty that makes them inviolate to our tampering. So this is one of the challenges, right? One thing that I often talk to my composition students about is how they can read a section of a text and then take a quiz on it and do terribly on the quiz, even though they read it. This happens because we're reading so passively. We're just kind of letting things wash over us, and we're not thinking about them. So it's important for us to find a way to teach our students to read actively. Now, what does that mean? Well, it certainly means that there has to be some sort of thought about the words that are coming in. Oftentimes, those students that are reading a text that they end up doing badly on a quiz on, maybe their eyes are literally on the page. Maybe they are doing the specific work of paying attention to what's going on, but they're not really paying attention. You know, the words are on the page, but they're thinking about what they're going to have for dinner that night, or they're thinking about the basketball game that's that's going to be taking place, or the movie that they want to see, or something else. And so what we have to do is make sure that reading is more active. Now, in a creative writing classroom, we have an advantage on that. Because if we have a student who is reading a biology textbook and is having trouble taking in the information, well, that might be because the information is dry and difficult. If we're in a creative writing class and we're assigning texts that we really feel excited about, maybe there's a chance that the student will be more engaged by that than with something that is drier. That's why it's important to make sure that we're picking texts that we like. Does that guarantee everything? Unfortunately not. Right? We want it to mean that if we assign a book that we love dearly, we talked about this earlier in the semester, that means our students will love it dearly. They might not. That's okay. But we are reading things in creative writing classes most of the time that is designed for entertainment. So we might be able to have an easier chance of the students being engaged by that. But it is important for us to sort of combat that passivity. Because if we see writing as an exciting and active act, and then reading as this passive one in which we are less a driver and more just the vessel, then we might have a hard time keeping that argument up with our students that they need to be both writer and reader. Maybe it'll just feel like the writer part is the fun part and the reader part is the less fun part. We need to instill both as best we can. This also is important at all levels, right? When we get to the college level and I've got students in a creative writing class, do I believe that every student is reading every bit of text that I write? No. Or that I assign, not that I write, but that I assign. No, not necessarily. This is a student that probably has many other classes, and maybe they're trying to read all of it, but maybe not all of it gets there. We find ways of trying to get that into the discussion and making sure they do that. But we can assume that a student in a creative writing class at a college classroom is invested by the subject and wants to be there and wants to be involved and is therefore engaged. Does that mean that we don't need to worry about teaching that student how to read creatively? Of course, we should do that. But we often have kind of overlooked that, and I think it's worth talking about it in more detail. At the earlier levels, we've got to be more proactive. When we're talking about short stories or memoirs or any kind of nonfiction or plays or poems, we have to kind of teach the elementary and even to a degree the high school student how to read them, especially with poems. Reading a poem is a very challenging thing. Think about the poem that I read you to start, that Nothing in That Drawer. How did you respond to it? And you can tell me below. Again, I can tell you to go find it and look for it online, and maybe it's out there. But it really is literally the title, Nothing in That Drawer. And then that line just repeats and is 14 times the same line. So maybe you don't need to go look for it. Maybe I've just written it out for you. Well, what did you think about it? What was your response to it? What about imagining a high school student seeing that poem? What about imagining an elementary student seeing that poem? How did they respond? And is that the kind of poem that just feels silly? Is it hard to take seriously? Would a college student strive for meaning in this, where a high school student would think, what the hell is this? Why would I bother with this? Think about how we allow ourselves to read. As I said, I read this. Here are my notes on there. I probably read this in grad school. I don't remember the specifics. But I'm trying really hard to find meaning, and I think pretty successfully. I think my notes are good. And so I was somebody who had spent a lot of time reading poetry, a lot of time reading experimental postmodern poetry. And so I had tools in place to try to make sense or make art of something that might not be immediately deserving of that. And I think it would be interesting to see how a high school or an elementary student would look at this. Would they see it as a waste of time, as silly? Would they see it as brilliant? Would they see it innately as having value in a way that somebody else wouldn't? So I'm curious about this idea of reading. Now, I also want to talk a little bit more about our textbooks. And I've enjoyed the conversations that we've had on the other thread that I have set up. Let's keep conversations on that thread about the text. Frank and Jimmy have contributed. I know there are a few others in here, and I want us to get on there too. So please, when you have a chance, soon, get on that thread and talk about ideas that you have for the textbook. They can be about individual chapters. They can be about things that other people are saying, the things that I am saying. But let's get on that thread. I posted it first just a couple days ago. I want to get in there because, as you saw on our calendar of things for this month, I want to get an idea for our textbooks for sure by at least the 18th. So by February 18th, I'm going to ask you to submit a proposal for what individual chapter you want to write. Now, some people have already kind of talked to me about it, posted things, we've talked about it in class, but I want to have a paragraph set up about what you want to write about, maybe a prospective title of your chapter, and then a little bit about what it is that you want to do within this and why you think it will be valuable to what we're setting up. I'm not going to set up that thread yet for you to submit it because I still want us to have a little more time thinking about it. And we'll have more time when we meet up physically on the 11th in class to talk about things. But I really want to make sure that we are progressing in the right direction on this and moving forward. So let's make sure that we are on that thread. I want everybody to contribute. I want everybody to have comments. Our conversations on this on these Canvas threads are as important as the things we're doing in the classroom, and I'll count them as much. So I want to have everybody involved in those discussions. And like I said, when I post something up early in the week, just jump in and come back to it. I'm trying to go back to those threads myself to provide feedback. I've been able to do that this week. And I hope that you're able to do the same. So below, let's talk about this chapter by Paget and this conversation we're having. If you haven't had a chance to read it, please do. It's short. It's pretty innately readable. But I want you to chime in about this conversation about how reading fits in to the creative writing classroom. That we talk about writing a ton, and we do things about writing, but we kind of overlook reading. And how do we make sure that we have a balance between the active writing and the passive reading? What do we do to combine those things a little bit more? Or should we? Is reading just perfectly fine the way it is? Do we not need to worry about teaching strategies for reading in a creative writing classroom or everyone else? I am very curious about your thoughts on this. So please post below. And again, as I said, I'd love to hear from everybody, and I kind of need to. So let's make sure you are contributing to these Canvas threads, and then we'll see you in class on the 11th next week. All right, thanks everybody. Enjoy your week. Again, I'm sorry for being a little late on this one. I've had a weird week. Remember my daughter? She's over there. There she is. She's spinning around in a chair, looking very active. That looks like math homework that is being crushed right now. She had an accident. She got a mild concussion early in the week when a teenager in a large big box store, we'll call it Walmart, just for the lack of a term, ran down an aisle and knocked her over and bonked her right on her head. And so our poor Eliza has had a rough week of recovering from a concussion. We're doing okay. But so that kind of slowed me up. I've had a lot more time and watching this kid's eyes and making sure she didn't sleep too long, things like that. But I'm back, and if you would please provide comments below, I would love it. Thank you so much, and we will see you in the comments below. Thanks.